series, you're going to find out some information about evolutionaryastrology.net and the many different ways that we have on our website for you to become a student, from just listening to our free weekly podcast to actually becoming certified if that's your choice. We also have a very new development on our new website, new meaning that's less than a year old. We have our Astro Library, and this is where we've been taking our dozen years of audio and video files
And
and
webinar.
webinar, okay. All
Jupiter
right,
and Cancer
webinars.
series, yeah.
Webinars are starting to show up in the Astro Library as well. All of our information basically shows up in our library sooner or later, and you can see in front of you we have 3 different sections to the Astro Library. We have the number of titles and hours in each section, and even if you're registered students of our multimedia course, you will still find a wealth of information in the Astro Library. And then, of course, for those of you who want to study astrology, here are the 3 different segments that we offer. Now, I have been a student of evolutionary astrology for I think 28 years, and I'm fond of telling people the first 10 years all I did was study myself, trying to learn my own chart and why I was drawing to me the things that were happening in my life that woke me up to astrology. So I didn't pursue any certification right away. I just was out there studying and kind of doing it on my own, and then at one point decided, maybe I should get serious. Actually, Jeffrey Wolf Green kind of kicked me in the butt and said, why aren't you doing this stuff? And so these are the various materials that we have for everybody on our website. And so as I come back to this opening screen here, again, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's Adam Sommer. He's from the Colorado area, but he's going to be currently broadcasting with us from Southern California. And Adam is going to be speaking on the Venus retrograde cycle in Capricorn that's coming up, and the mastery of love. So Adam, take it away. Welcome, honey. Would you tell everybody a little bit about yourself as well before you do your presentation?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the introduction. That was great. I'm a firm believer in having an astrology teacher as well. It's true, we study ourselves. We're narcissists at heart when it comes to this stuff, but it's so important, I think, to have a guide. And I had 2 of them along the way, and it helped me so much to basically crystallize a foundational understanding of astrology. So yeah, I guess a brief introduction about myself is I never knew I would be an astrologer. I was in acupuncture school studying medical qigong before astrology hit me. I had read Richard Tarnas's book, Cosmos and Psyche, actually when I was in school, mainly because I had read his first book, Passion of the Western Mind, and found it incredibly fascinating. And so I just read it out of curiosity, and it was quite an amazing read. And when I moved out to Portland to start a practice with my partner at the time, I was meeting astrologers, like a lot of them, and I was trading with them, and one in particular who is a student of Jeff Green's and actually wrote the foreword, I believe, to the reprint of Pluto 1. I met him, Ari Moshe Wolf, and he kind of blew my mind with astrology. And so I moved in with him. I downloaded his brain into mine, and then I started using it as a diagnostic tool within my practice. 6 months later, yeah?
Adam, I had someone in the audience ask if you could speak a little louder.
Louder?
I'm hearing you just fine. So if more in the audience cannot hear him, just type me a question and let me know louder, please. Or type a comment in there. So I'm hearing you just fine, but just in case.
Is this better? I just put my headphones on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. Yep. That works a lot nicer.
There you go. There you go. All right, cool. Carry on. You met Ari.
Yeah, I met Ari, and then I took that knowledge back to Boulder and was just basically using it as a diagnostic tool with patients. It was really helpful, more so than like taking pulses or anything like that for me. And then 6 months later, I was getting readings. I had started a podcast called the Exploring Astrology Podcast, where my main interest was to have conversations with astrologers that I was reading, and I was just like fascinated by the idea of talking to them, recording it, and I don't know, using music and art around it to kind of make astrology more accessible and more cool in a way for my generation and beyond. And so that is what kind of created everything. Like this podcast really was a hit. And by the end of that summer, which I think was 2008, I like had 4 students. I was giving readings every day. I was doing the podcast every week. And ever since then, astrology has been a full-time gig for me. And so I blog, I have a podcast, I have an apprenticeship program. I absolutely love the language of astrology, and the main way that I use it is to help people understand, of course, their life process, their soul purpose, very much an EA core belief, but and through that understanding to inspire them to live the most authentic life that they possibly can. So I want them like excited about life after they talk to me. I want them to be like ready to make changes in their life. I just don't want to look at the chart and be like, oh, you're so special. You have a Taurus moon conjunct Jupiter and stuff like this. So yeah, so my website is holstoheavens.com. Everything on there is free. You can subscribe to the podcast via iTunes and to the site to get information on the blog and all that stuff. So
all right.
Yeah.
All right, well, take it away.
Okie doke.
Adam, one input from one of our speakers again. If we could look for maybe your computer speakers or audio gain itself and try to get a little bit more volume, it would be greatly appreciated.
More volume through my I have a microphone right here. You know, let me try this.
If you're using little earbuds like me, sometimes it's actually just putting it closer to the chin.
I'm going to try something that could revolutionize my voice here. I have a recording microphone that I use for recording music, and I'm going to see if I can change this up. Has it changed yet? Because I just plugged it in. I'm looking for preferences.
Well, we've got a mixture of people who can hear you just fine, and then some others.
A new microphone.
Well, you just start talking, and I'll wait and see what the audience says to me, and I'll interrupt you if we cannot hear.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let me make the presentation bigger. And yes, the topic of this discussion is Venus retrograde in Capricorn, 2013 to 2014. Before we actually get into that cycle in particular, I believe that we need to understand Venus retrograde in general, astronomically, astrologically, psychologically, its spiritual implications, and ultimately how it affects our heart and our ability to kind of dial up to the frequency of love. This topic of Venus retrograde, it's the rarest of all the planetary retrogrades, only happening once, I believe, every 584 days, 18 months, and remains retrograde for around 40 days. And I've only been studying astrology for a short time, like I mentioned in my introduction, but what really happened, or what brought this cycle into my awareness, was a story of this man who he was madly in love with this woman, thought he was going to spend his entire life
Adam,
with this woman. Yeah.
Adam, I'm getting a consensus that people feel that the microphone you were using previously worked better.
Okay.
So if you want to just take a moment to switch back to that one, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. So using
Yeah,
the
that
other one.
is louder. Definitely louder.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll just hold
Okay.
it in front of my face. I can do that.
Yeah, or nuzzle those earbuds. You know, that one big part of the line on your earbuds is actually an inline microphone. So as long as that's close to your
For sure.
close to your chin as possible, I think we'll be cool, Adam.
For sure. For sure. Okay. So where was I? Oh yeah. This man who was in love and had thought that he was going to spend his entire life with this woman. They were trying to have children. There was discussion of marriage. There was big moves, and there was all these, things that couples go through that was happening in this man's life. And this one fall in particular, it was the fall of 2010 when Venus went retrograde in Scorpio. It actually stationed retrograde very close to his moon, and then went all the way back in those 40 days and stationed direct on his Pluto, which of course is the ruler of his moon. And what happened in those 40 days was, as he describes in memoirs or whatever, is the darkest period of his life. And on the day of the stationary retrograde, his girlfriend didn't show up at home. She was gone until the wee hours of the night, and showed up at around 3:30 in the morning with another man in his house. And she had fallen in love in just one day. And thus, the greatest trauma to this man's heart happened. And it was a crippling experience. And this man, who I refer to, is an older version of myself. I experienced this, and it was no doubt the most pain I've ever felt in my heart. It was betrayal, it was abandonment, which is somewhat of the same thing, but it was such an intense experience. And being an astrologer and being able to have the chart and looking at this cycle and how it played out, I realized that there was something to Venus retrograde. And what is it? That this cycle, when she goes retrograde, she's an evening star, as she is right now. And when she apparently turns around and goes backwards, it's in a sense the beginning of a process of shedding, of letting go. You can make a point to say that this is true for all planets when they go retrograde, just like the words, like reflecting and reprogramming and reworking whatever that archetype needs to rework. And what is Venus all about but love? Within the Taurian realm, it's self-love and all of the things that we deem most valuable in our lives. And within the Libra realm, it's personal love, right? It's our love for our friends. It's our love for our partners. And this function, I believe, starts within the Taurus realm, that it is an impossibility to have a healthy relationship with another person or even with God without having one with yourself first, which is Taurus, second house, the internal function of Venus. And so as she goes retrograde, she comes back in between the earth and the sun and passes between. And this is what's called the inferior conjunction. Actually, yeah, we'll go to this slide. The inferior conjunction, which is a really important part of the cycle. She continues retrograde, emerges as a morning star, turns direct, and then she remains a morning star for quite some time. And we'll get into more of these details in future slides. But it's a beautiful cycle of letting go, going into the underworld, birthing with in a sense, a new vibration within one's heart center, with new values, with new desires to accomplish in the world. Now, there's a lot of discrepancy, it seems, and I'm not sure even what I believe about what marks the beginning of this Venus cycle. Some people say it starts when Venus goes retrograde. Some people say it starts when it's an inferior conjunction, synodic cycle. Others will say that it actually begins when she first appears as a morning star, and we'll look at all these dates also in future slides. But ultimately, it's a tale of transformation of the love function within us. Our values completely transform. Now, depending on the sign, I think, that Venus goes retrograde in, where this occurs in your chart, matters in a very big way. And I'll illustrate that as well with some examples in a future slide. But it's where the meditation or where the reflection is occurring about certain attachments. Key word with this, attachments that we have to things, people, places, possessions that no longer serve us, that actually get in the way from the next step of our evolution. One very common thing that I have noticed with Venus retrogrades over the years is old relationships showing up. Now, they don't need to just be romantic ones, but old friends, high school friends hitting you up out of nowhere on Facebook, or just serendipitously running into an old lover in a supermarket, or whatever it may be. Why do these old relationships show up during Venus retrograde? And I think, at least from personal experience, it's a reminder of how far you have come. And also to smooth out the edges and just be a reflection for each other on, oh wow, like I once was really, really, really mad at you over this stupid thing. And now we can talk and hug it out and we're good. And so it's almost this karmic meeting of two souls, just to make this is just to know that we're all the same thing. It's okay. It's all love, anyways. And this whole movement, this is my philosophical idea, at least, around the ultimate purpose of Venus retrogrades, is kind of to clean out debris every single cycle around the heart, until at some point along our evolution there's nothing there, and all there is pure and divine love. Agape, in contrast to eros, which is personal love. And so there's a very fascinating 8-year cycle that relates to Venus, that every single time she stations retrograde in the sky and comes back for the inferior conjunction, it's 216, I believe, degrees different. Yeah, 215.6 degrees different along the ecliptic, thus creating a perfect pentagon in the sky. As you can see here, and this chart illustrates where all those events took place over the past 8 years, which was 2004, which was a Venus transit of the sun, when actually Venus passed directly within the path of Sun and Earth. And then in 2012, which was last June, it happened again, thus closing the cycle. And there's the fact that she creates this perfect geometry in the night sky, and also greets us before the sun and after the sun, and is the brightest thing in the sky, is very much an astronomical symbol for why she relates to beauty and harmony and love, that she creates it within her movements. And there's other things around it that we can explore. The fact that there's 5 of these retrogrades within an 8-year cycle before she pretty much goes back to the same place along the zodiac. So in 2004, it was at 26 degrees Gemini, and then in 2012, it was at 24 degrees Gemini. And so it slowly moves westward or backwards throughout the ecliptic every single cycle. And so this number 5 is a pretty cool number in that it relates to the symmetry of our own bodies. 5 fingers, 5 toes, we spread ourselves out like the picture here, and our head, our arms, and our feet can be superimposed upon this geometry, 2 triangles. Another interesting astronomical fact about Venus is that she actually revolves opposite of the sun in a much slower fashion. She actually makes 12 rotations. So the days on Venus are incredibly long. 12 rotations in these 8 years of the cycle, thus showing us the same face of her 12 times in 8 years, which is really interesting, and there's a lot of number stuff with this. I really love this Sri Yukteswar quote, who's Yogananda's teacher, and I think relates to the essence of what Venus is bestowing upon humanity. Ordinary love is selfish, darkly rooted in desires and satisfaction. Divine love is without condition, without boundary, without change. Flux of the human heart is gone forever at the transfixing touch of pure love, the goal of Venus. Some more of the sacred geometry stuff. I guess I'll read this. It feels like things are flowing nicely and we have a lot of time here. So phi, or pi, however you want to pronounce it, there's a bit of discrepancy about that, but the divine proportion of harmony. It's what is in nature. It is what is in amazing art. It is the golden ratio, and Venus somehow relates to this. Curiously, 8 Earth years, 8 times 365 equals 2920, which equals 13 of Venus's years. More numbers. 2 numbers that have an intriguing relationship when combined with the 5 of its synodic cycles, like we were talking about, and 8 Earth years with 12 Venusian days is a harmonious pattern emerges. These numbers are familiar to anyone who has played the piano or is familiar with music theory and the Fibonacci sequence, which is pi. An octave, 8, contains 12 white keys and 5 black keys, comprising the chromatic scale. The 13th note begins the next octave. The orbital ratio of 13 Venus years to 8 Earth years, 13:8, reflects the Fibonacci sequence and the ratio that produces the number 1.625, which is essentially the golden ratio, or pi. Fascinating. How does she do it? Or he do it? Or the gods do it? What is this all about? These numbers, these geometries, these relations that these planets have in our lives. It is so interesting. So we kind of already talked about the Venus transits and how it happens when Venus crosses between the Earth and Sun. And it doesn't happen every day. It's actually quite a rare happening, and I'm trying to find the numbers to how often it occurs exactly. So the 2 Venus transits, 2004 and 2012, they occurred, and they were there wasn't a Venus transit once in the 20th century. In fact, the last Venus transits were in December of 1774 and December of 1882. And this pattern actually follows 21 and a half years, and then it occurs, the 2 Venus transits 8 years apart, and then it goes 105 and a half years, the 2 Venus transits happen, and then it just keeps back and forthing with that. It doesn't happen every 8 years. It is a rare occurrence, and we got to experience that in 2004 and 2012 in the sign of Gemini. Late Gemini. So it's actually really important to know where that was in your own natal chart. because in 2004, I think, in a sense, was like a seed to this really essential idea that Venus was trying to bestow upon us. And then 8 years later, it was the actual manifestation or the closing of that cycle. And so it's a very interesting thing to like study in your own chart. And just an idea of what it relates to, you know, Venus, like an eclipse-like event moving in between Earth and Sun, acts like a magnifying glass of love. I interviewed Adam Gainsbourg during the last Venus transit last summer, and I really like the way he described it in saying that it was the rebirth of the solar feminine, that Venus kind of both astronomically and in reality worked as this like um, lens of like focusing all of this energy. That's why it's like dangerous to stare at an eclipse like event, because light moves around the body like that and then concentrates. But also energetically and vibrationally speaking, that it's like a rebirth of the goddess, that we all know just through observation that like the patriarchy is slowly decaying and the matriarchy is kind of moving back. You can study the Yuga cycle, the Great Year, to understand that motion. But it's true. I mean, we almost had a woman president, women's rights, all this stuff. I mean, it's happening. And like that event, in a sense, just kind of like, I think was an amazing moment for just in all of us on a personal scale, like awakening this part of our femininity, of Venus within us. And I know for myself, it was an incredible experience that related to a breakthrough with music, actually. The next Venus transits actually won't occur until December 2117, December 2125. I do believe that's very close to the date of the latest movie when it's based, Elysium. I really hope the world does not look like that when we are there. Oh, yeah. The two masks of Venus, as the morning star, as the Greeks called her, Phosphoros, and then the evening star, Hesperos. Spending 263 days in each of these phases, the morning star, by a lot of cultures, and we'll look at this in a future slide, was related to and treated as a somewhat ominous sign that it actually related to war. Now, looking at ancient ways of seeing things, it's really important, I think, to transcribe what they were saying and know that humanity's evolution was in a very different place 2,000 plus years ago. And especially now, I think that we are exponentially evolving as a human species. And so things like that, especially like reading Vedic astrology texts and whatnot, it's like very important to just like to look deeper into it. And so what I feel is really going on with the morning star phase is it's a very Martian Aries-like quality to it, that there's an excitement of the reemergence of the goddess into the world. And you know, she's almost like running in front of the sun, you know, just like this drunken lover that wants so much to connect and to share these ideas and to learn everything that she can learn about whatever this new discovery was. And like there's like a very instinctual and perhaps even like sloppy quality to it. And in studying it within natal charts and also within like experiences, I have seen this to be kind of true. Of course, it's a gross generalization, but in general, I see it to be true. Whereas the evening star, Hesperos, relates more to the refined aspect of love, like the crone energy, or just this feeling of like she's just lingering there. Like just watch her tonight as the sun goes down in the night sky, and she's just like this last remnants of light that is just speaking with you and sharing all of this cosmic intelligence with the sun gazer who just watched the sunset. There's a quality in natal charts I have recognized of people with this that have it's not that they're exactly deeply rooted in their ways. There's just like an innate wisdom of the heart that exists with them. And, in studying these cycles again and as well, I have noticed it to be true as far as, like the process of how we are growing in our relationships, both to self and to others. So, let's take it a little bit deeper here and understand maybe how our ancestors related to her in myth by creating icons and gods, or well, in this case, goddesses, in relation to her. It goes back as far as 3000 BC from Uruk, an important Sumerian city in southern Iraq. And in ancient Sumer, the goddess Inanna was associated with the planet Venus, and the Uruk tablets specify her celestial identity as the Venus, with like her symbol, like the star that she creates in the sky. Also, and during her journey into the underworld, it's very much like this process where she disappears in the sky in both of her conjunctions. Inanna passes through the 7 gates. Are they chakras? Are they weeks? What do they relate to? But removing an article of clothing at every gate until she gets completely naked, exposing her nakedness, naked as she came, in the darkest realms of the underworld. And so in a sense, through the inferior conjunction, what happens when she's retrograde, she's gone from the night sky, or from the sky, for 7 to 9 days, and then with the superior conjunction, which actually happens when she's direct and she's on the opposite side of the sun, she's gone for like 60 days. And so she spends a lot of time not really present for us in the night sky. And we think back to 3000 BC to stargazers, and it's like, where did she go? Like, what's going on? And of course, myth is then born, whether it comes through dream or stories around the fire. It relates very much to the way in which they're navigating themselves in the world, because they're not distracted by webinars, podcasts, TV, and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. Adam, I'm still getting just a little bit of feedback of people wanting you to continue to try and project your voice as well as possible. But great material, honey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm holding the mic right in front of my mouth, so I don't know what else I could do.
Yeah, okay. That does get it a little louder. So go ahead.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, any listeners, let me make this comment, Adam. Any listeners who feel you cannot hear it quite so well, he's showing up very well for me, and I suspect that the recording will capture his voice quite loudly, and so you will have this recording to go back and catch it all again in just a day or so. All right, Adam, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so on this slide you can see the depiction of her journey in the underworld. I believe it is in the Sumerian tablets above, and then below it's just a really beautiful astrological influence painting of her, Venus, Inanna, whomever. We also see it show up in Egyptian mythology. Venus does, within the tale of Isis and Osiris. And it's her search throughout Egypt for her dead husband, who is Osiris. And this whole search is likened to Inanna's descent. Thus, the Egyptians may have associated death and resurrection with the Venus evening and morning star appearances, or perhaps with its conjunctions behind the sun and its periods of visibility. And in a way, like it's a twist to the story, that where the Inanna descent is more like a personal. Well, actually, I don't know the whole myth, so I can't make that distinction or contrast. But this one, relating to, the search of a long lost lover, like the exteriorization of, your inner beloved, in a sense. And I think the ultimate discovery is realizing that what we are looking for all along, like the greatest Venusian enlightenment, is right beneath our nose. It's always there. and that every single relationship that we have in our life's experience is just a reflection of what it is that we need to learn about Venus. You know, loving without attachment, loving unconditionally, always knowing that we're loving something greater the whole way through it, really supporting each other. And also, the word compersion, I think, is really important in the higher essences of Venus's expression, which means to actually experience joy for another person's joy. That is not being possessive in relationship at all, and being open to them, your partner, like having friends and having experiences with other people of the opposite sex. However far that goes is up to you, but to really experience joy around that, I think, is a very evolved way of relating to this archetype. The Ankh strangely looks like Venus's symbol, doesn't it? The key of life, which appears all over Egyptian tomb paintings and art, and it's this aspect of hands grasped together above the head of the god or goddess in the afterlife. It's very interesting that like this key of life, the Ankh, is still the symbol that we use today for Venus.
It's interesting. I had never put that I've seen Ankhs forever and never put those two together till just now. Thank you.
Isn't it interesting?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Now here's a topic of lots of discussion, at least that it was until leading up to December 21st, 2012, is how did the Maya relate to Venus? Well, not to like get too deeply into it, but like one of their calendars, one of the really important calendars in Mayan astrology, relates to Venus. It's a 260-day calendar, which is like her morning and evening star phases. But the Mesoamerican astrologers are part of, or they related to the morning star phase of Venus to be a dangerous time. The Dresden Codex, which is a pre-Columbian book that dates to like 11th, 12th century, is this book. It's like written about like all these cycles and like the calendar and whatnot, and they related her morning star phase with Quetzalcoatl, the bringer of life. And so if you're not familiar with Quetzalcoatl, is the feathered serpent. There's like all these different relations to like how he shows up within their mythology and also their history. That when Cortez showed up on the shore, like he was said to be like Quetzalcoatl to some extent. I don't really know the details of that, but ultimately, the most interesting insight into this was a book written by Daniel Pinchbeck called The Return of Quetzalcoatl, which related to that solstice last year. And that day or that year, the way I see it, was the return of Quetzalcoatl, which relates to the Venus transit that happened on June 5th of 2012. And so how does Quetzalcoatl return? Like, what does this look like? What is it all about? It, Quetzalcoatl is about the oneness of all things at all times, and being able to like allow that serpent to like rise in us. That sounds so familiar to that thing called the Kundalini, the light at the bottom of our spine. I think that ultimately the Venus transit of last year and the solstice were just very profound yet subtle activations to our sensitivity to energy in our bodies, and also like this like kind of like incineration chamber in our hearts that's like just pulling debris out. And it's been hard lately, especially since 2011. I think that ever since the Pluto Uranus square has lined up, and all these really intense eclipses and whatnot, that like people are having a really hard time. People are having a lot of struggle in relationships. There's a lot of divorces. There's a lot of trauma that is happening, and like you have to ask why. Because we're attached to certain things. We don't suffer if we're not attached. And so if we can free ourselves from all these debris that exist around the Venusian archetype inside of us, then really everything is a blessing and everything is beautiful. bring it on, right? And so what we have on the slide is a few pictures of like Quetzalcoatl, and the one on the top left is kind of a comical one. It's a little hard to see, but it's the way they used to draw this character. The one to the right, which is a little bit erotic and intense, is, oh goodness, what's the artist's name? He does like the Conan artwork. But anyways, this painting is called Quetzalcoatl as well, and it depicts the experience I feel of her being in the underworld, you know, of like this really intense experience of basically frequenting like the shadows and the fiery furnaces within all of our deeper secrets. They gotta go. They have to be released, and it's a painful process to die, metaphorically speaking. The art to the right of it is just amazing. It reminds me of ayahuasca, of just like puking it all out, just getting it all out of you, this green sludge within our being. And like that too, very much I think relates to the two conjunctions that Venus experiences, the underworld and whatnot. And then, you know, the last picture is just this beautiful moment. If you can see that little character on the rock that's floating, like facing Quetzalcoatl. And I think that it's this beautiful process that, you know, relates to Pluto as well. I would specifically talk about, like, you know, seeing the dragon in the eyes and realizing that it wasn't real all along, which is what, in a psychospiritual sense, but our fears. You know, like we're emotional beings. We make decisions from the moon, and it's all to make us feel comfortable and secure and loved. But if we're able to induce a state of consciousness to where we can see directly into the eyes of that dragon and realize that it wasn't real all along, then I think that frees up a whole lot of creative energy and love within our lives. And it's a very essential process, I feel, within the Venus retrograde cycle. Jesus even is involved. I mean, my goodness, how so? Well, he's sometimes called the morning star, supposedly. From Revelation 22:16, I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star. Fascinating. So what I have here is this little screenshot of the dates where throughout the last 8-year cycle, Venus went retrograde and then direct. Retrograde, then direct. Now, I could have studied, oh, I don't know, a musician that I love or anybody and like arbitrarily come up with like experiences that the media has shared so I can like sift through Wikipedia and really get a good idea of like particular life events. Or, you know, I could look at these dates and reflect upon them for myself and realize, my God, really? Like that's a Venus cycle. Like that's an 8-year cycle. And so it's a really fascinating thing. And, you know, just a little bit of transparency and disclosure, I'll just share with you like what every single point of this cycle represented for me and like where it's brought me. I think it's helpful to do it this way. So at the beginning of the past 8-year cycle, Venus went retrograde on May 17th, 2004. The actual synodic event when the inferior conjunction happened didn't happen until I think the 6th of June, but we'll just in general talk about like these time periods, these 40 days. So at that point in my life, I dropped out of college. I had this epiphany in a Buddhism class one day at UNC, and I realized that I could not be in academia. It was impossible. And I was doing it for all these strange reasons, like my parents wanted me to, or society wanted me to, and I wasn't going to be able to be successful if I didn't go. And it was like a really huge decision because I didn't know what was on the other side of it. I just made the decision because it was bullcrap in my eyes. And so I just like stormed into the registrar office like at the end of the semester right before finals and quit. Venus retrograde on my North Node, 10th house. Then in 2005, the second Venus retrograde in the cycle, December 24th, right before Christmas, 2005, and it was retrograde until February of 2006, was a very interesting time as well. I actually had went back to college at this point, but it wasn't exactly a normal college. It was Naropa, which is kind of like a Buddhist university, and you can create your own major. And so I was essentially studying consciousness and meditation and shamanism. And I created my own major called Walking the Invisible Landscape. It was a very interesting time, and it happened in my 5th house. And like the main theme that happened for me, like in that time period, was awakening to the ability of writing songs with my guitar, because there's so many creative people in Boulder and at Naropa that this like explosion of creative energy came out of me. Very interesting. The third that occurred was in July, late July of 2007 until September of 2007. This was the darkest period of my life, and the emergence of some sense of purpose, I suppose. It happened, or it went retrograde at 0 degrees Virgo, which is my 12th house. It's right above my ascendant. And so, of course, like I was completely lost at sea and had no idea really what the dream I wanted to focus on was. I had experienced tons of disillusionment before this retrograde, just so much naivety of just traveling the world and doing this, that, and the other thing. And during this phase is when I started school again. This is very interesting how this like school stuff starts, because when the whole cycle started, it was in Gemini, right? Like that's the 2004 Venus transit, Gemini, and Gemini has everything to do with education. Also, bringing in the fact that it was on my North Node, destiny. So I went back to school again in 2007, but this time it wasn't even like academia or Naropa, it was acupuncture school. That's exactly when I started, August of 2007. And it was an amazing time for me of like really deep healing, of getting treated a lot, discovering medical qigong, and oh my goodness, it was amazing. And it was like divine grace, 12th house. And then when Venus went direct and crossed my ascendant, it was like the birth of this new version of myself in a really profound way. The 4th Venus retrograde in the cycle was in March of 2009, and it happened until April 17th, 2009. What happened in this period? This was the birth of the podcast that I was talking about in my introduction. This was the beginning of me taking astrology seriously. That in that phase from going to acupuncture school until this, like it was just a complete immersion of like Chinese medicine and astrology, actually. And so during this one, which it occurred in my 8th house in Aries, it was the birth of my business and my website, Holes to Heavens. Like I started my website in that period. Very, very fascinating, like how it's in the 8th house as well, because I think about other people in relation to that, just my teachers and the people that I would have on the show and all the support that can come through the 8th house, shared resources and shared knowledge and stuff like this. And so the 5th and final retrograde before the cycle moves on was the story that I told you in the beginning of this discussion. October 8th, 2010 to November 18th, 2010. When retrograde on my moon in Scorpio, went direct on Pluto, it was the greatest trauma of my life and ejected me right out of that relationship and that scenario and put me into, I would say, like the greatest position to thrive in my life, which brought me back to Boulder independently with nobody like holding me back. And it was like the greatest explosion of like creativity within astrology that I'd ever had. Like thousands of people coming to my website and listening to my stuff, and I was just like blown away that I had only been like studying this for a short amount of time, and blah 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 blah. It happened. And so like you have those 5 retrogrades, and then when Venus has another transit of the sun, which was last June, it begins thus a new cycle. And so on June 5th of 2012, a whole new 8-year cycle began. And so like whatever your experience was then and like where 24 degrees Gemini is at in your chart, very important to understand that. And so thank you for listening to my story. I hope that it's helpful in understanding the importance of these retrogrades, because now we're going to explore the one that's about to happen, which is the second retrograde of this cycle. And it goes retrograde at 28 plus degrees Capricorn on the solstice, the important day of December 21st, and then goes direct at 13 degrees Capricorn on January 31st. And some of the other dates, like she disappears from the evening sky on the 5th of January 2014, and then reemerges like 9 days later, or actually more than 9 days later. When was that 9? On January 17th. And on the 11th is the inferior conjunction, which is exactly conjunct the sun, and just some dates. And we're actually going to look at the charts. That's why I'm kind of like skimming over this. And so let's explore this a little in relation. And this is the way I understand the whole cycle, is you have to look to the beginning, just like you have to look to the new moon to know what comes into fruition with the full moon. That on June 5th of 2012 was the Venus transit at 24 degrees Gemini. What was the theme of that time for you? What was the topic of interest? What were you learning? What were you wanting to bring into your life? Essentially, what ideas were completely reworking the neural fibers in your brain? And in this retrograde, being in Capricorn, is the manifestation of it in real time, that is, with people that can assist you in, I would say, better understanding these ideas that are kind of like shaping you, and also taking a very deep look into the structure of your life, of your relationships, and all of it. Capricorn relates to rules that we have for ourselves, rules that we abide by outside entities. I think that all of these rules. I think that it's a foundational shift that we're going to experience as the new year comes, where maybe New Year's resolutions will actually stick in 2014. Perhaps. And it's also really important to note, and we're going to look at this in the charts, is the close proximity to Pluto that this cycle stations on. That Pluto is currently in Capricorn, involved with Uranus in this square that is definitely a world-changing, life-changing aspect. And this current cycle that Venus is going to embark on is essentially stopping and getting clear and moving forward in the morning sky, 1 degree away from Pluto. This is important because it kind of brings the whole idea of death and rebirth to more of a highlighted aspect in my imagination. And so let's just look at these charts and just kind of play around a little bit. And so the first chart is actually for when Venus goes retrograde. I used equal houses with these charts, and I also put the sun on the ascendant sunrise chart for all of these. So what we see in this chart is Venus in the second house, and I'm not going to really like interpret houses here, but we're just going to play with ideas. At 28 degrees Capricorn, ready to descend from the evening sky. The sun, not too far away from Pluto, conjunct Mercury and a Leo moon. The first thought that comes to mind around this is, yes, there's some deep foundational shift that is happening here. You know, the hermit wants to move into his cave to really reflect on everything that has happened over the past year and a half, or goodness, lifetime. But with the moon and Leo in the ninth house, I think like as an imprint to this Venus retrograde is this idea of being fearless and playing, like remembering the innocence of our childhood, remembering how we can make time disappear with our creativity and making time for that. Again, Capricorn has everything to do with structure, how we structure our days, how we structure our diet, how we structure our relationships and our time. And I think that there's a really deep question within the cycle of like, how can I restructure my life to create more time for play and for dance and for laughter? How can I do that? So the next chart is the inferior conjunction chart when Venus is retrograde and fuses with the sun. Some say this is the beginning of the cycle. Again, I don't really have a strong opinion on when the beginning of the cycle is, but in the creation of the pentagram, this is what they can use as the synodic cycle, Venus and the sun. So 21 degrees Capricorn, Mercury still not too far away. It's anaretic, last degree of a sign. And the moon's in Gemini in this chart. And so what I feel is being fused, you know, that idea I used of the magnifying glass of love onto the earth and into your heart, is kind of solidifying this question of how can I make more time, right? And the Gemini moon is an incredibly crafty and I would say it gives us the ability to make connections and delete things and whatnot to perhaps create this space for ourselves, you know. But Venus is gone from the night sky. There's a feeling of, I don't know, it's the calm before some sort of an event, not necessarily a storm, but just like that pause before a birth. And that's what happens when she becomes a morning star, which is on January 17th. Oh, sorry. The last one was January 11th. And on January 17th, we finally can see her again in the morning sky just before the sun rises. Actually, this chart depicts that very well. As you can see in the western horizon, just above the ascendant is Venus. And we have a Leo moon, again, like she awakens, she crawls out on her elbows from the underworld and has this renewed sense of purpose. And she's, you know, in very close proximity to Pluto, this transformation that's taking place. And then when she goes direct, she's just 1 degree away from Pluto, which is on January 31st. And, you know, whenever a planet comes into contact with Pluto, I think whether it's a conjunction, square, and opposition, there's still a similar quality of being unable to escape from the macabre thoughts that come with it. Those thoughts that we don't want to even think, those feelings that just come up about I don't know, our mortality or how crappy we're showing up in our relationships. And we know that we can do better, but we don't because we're lazy, and how much we can treat our bodies better with, like, more time for yoga and, eating better food and sleeping more, like everything. I feel with Venus Pluto contacts, it's just like right in your face. Like, what are all the things that are actually separating you from that contact of the pure love, which is Venus? And when Venus goes direct, it actually happens very close, or a day away from the new moon in Aquarius. And so you can see that just beneath the ascendant. And I think it's a beautiful and auspicious time for her to be so high in the morning sky and to turn direct, that the Aquarian energy gives us this objective lens to project into our future so that we can make better plans with it. And also, I think, calling in all of the people that we need to support us to make that vision possible. And so back, like, in Venus and Pluto, like that conjunction is like seeing all of the decaying aspects of our relationships. Perhaps we're in relationships that are really unhealthy, like we're being manipulated, we're manipulating them, we're being taken advantage of, whatever it is. I mean, like, here's an opportunity to get super clear about, no, like, I don't want you in my life. I'm free and independent now. I'm Venus, the morning star, phosphorus, and I relate to war. I'll destroy this relationship if I need to be doing so. And then we have the superior conjunction, which happens on October 25th, just before Halloween in 2014. And my good God, this is a powerful chart. The superior conjunction, again, is a longer disappearance of Venus in the sky because she's on the other side of the sun. It's around 60 days, if I'm correct on that. And this chart is incredibly powerful for a few reasons. You see the high concentration of Scorpio energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Pallas Athena just next to Venus. You got the moon and Saturn and Ceres. And like it very much, like, whenever I see Ceres and Venus or Pluto, in a sense, Scorpio can be substituted for it. It reminds me of the Persephone myth, which is not too different than Inanna's story, but how she, is kidnapped by Hades, brought into the underworld, forced to be her bride. A deal was struck with Ceres or Demeter to where she can come back onto the surface of the earth for 1/3 of the year, which is, when is it, harvest time, or I don't know the details of this, but 1/3 of the year she gets to come back and then has to go back down for her husband. And I could have the third or 2/3 part messed up. I'm totally sloppy with mythology. Joseph Campbell would whip me if he knew I was trying to talk about this. But with all the Scorpio energy, with Venus being gone and Mercury being retrograde on the north node of the moon, what I see here is again, like the experience of the underworld of having to shed things that are no longer serving us. But Mercury in Libra retrograde, it kind of like furthers like this whole philosophy that I've been talking about the whole time. Like, what mirrors do you want in your life that are actually good mirrors that are helping you evolve and make it to the next level? And Mercury retrograde, just like Venus retrograde, is reflecting on something, and it's a Libran quality. What is it? What do I need to release so that I actually can call in, like, the perfect friend or the perfect lover for me in this phase? The idea of soul contracts that come in when we're ready. And so this is a really intense Halloween week. I feel that we can no doubt prepare for by understanding these transits to come. And then she becomes an evening star on the 9th of December, 2014. And there's a few things that I really love about this chart. One, that she's in the last degree of Sagittarius, the sun's in Sagittarius. And the second is where the moon's at. The moon's in Cancer, and so there's this like I was saying when the evening star, like it's kind of like this crone energy or this wisdom of the heart. You have these incredible placements in late Sagittarius, which is the galactic center, which in my own experience with people that have planets there in their natal chart, they innately have that connection to the source. There's like some kind of profound wisdom, not knowledge, wisdom that lives within them. And so that's a very fascinating thing when she shows up in the night sky, but also the moon in Cancer about really coming home to ourselves and owning our energy. I mean, like, I don't need to scramble it all over the place anymore, you know? Like, if you're looking for love, if you're looking for wealth and luxury and all this stuff, I mean, it will come. It will come. If it's meant to come, it will come. Just keep focusing your energy on it. But like for now, I feel really comfortable and I feel pretty tapped in. This is a beautiful chart. And then here's the next Venus retrograde. And that's July 25th, 2015, quite a long ways away. And it happens at 0 degrees Virgo. So I'm going to have to erase and edit what I said when about the one that occurred in 2007. I think that one was more like in Leo, because they all kind of like move westward along the ecliptic, but they're still close. So yeah, in this chart, I mean, we don't need to analyze this one too much because it's a whole new cycle, but you see how the focus shifts. Like most of her journey in the next cycle is going to be in the sign of Leo, because like 0 degrees Virgo, and then goes and drops into that, which I find interesting in looking back at the beginning of the cycle that we're moving into. Remember the Leo moon that showed up the day that she goes retrograde and the day that she emerges as a morning star, and this whole idea of being fearless and playing, all of that. Like here we have another cycle to really help refine that aspect. Have we become too self-focused? Have we shut all these people out of our lives because like all we care about is writing this book or whatever it is? And so those are the charts. And Kim, you said that maybe you would stop me at some point. Is this a stop point maybe for like poll questions or anything?
This works, Adam.
Sure.
You went just a little bit over an hour, so looks like we'll have some time for some Q&A. Leroy?
Yeah, we'll move into a poll, but in this case, it'll be more like a test question. So we'll invite everybody to participate by choosing one of the following. How many days between the Venus retrograde cycles Adam's describing in the talk? So you can all just go ahead and participate with Adam and select your answer, or we'll call it a test question rather than a poll. Because yes, he did tap into this answer on the earlier in the presentation, and we're about half the people have voted, so we'll give another 30 seconds or so to have everybody respond, hopefully.
Nice.
Great graphics and photos in your presentation, Adam. That's one thing I think is so powerful about this format is you can, I kind of got entranced, I would say, in a couple of the photos and pictures. So it's kind of nice to mix that in with the information.
Yeah, I love art, and I use a lot of it on my site and with everything I write, with PDFs I create for classes and webinars I do. I think it's incredibly powerful, like Venus, like it's art, it's music, it's anything that's beautiful, and I think that it helps portray the ideas. Some people are visual learners, some people are audio learners, and music is an incredible way of doing it too, like songs that like really relate to what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does stimulate the whole brain. Let's just call it that. And I think most people on this call know and respond to that type of energy. So I'm going to close the poll, and we'll just share some results here briefly. as you can see, we have some astrologers on the call, and they've been paying attention. So 4 out of 5 certainly knew that the rarest of all retrograde cycles is 84 days. Of course,
Yeah.
there are indeed days on Venus, but that was the most interesting tidbit that I learned is, how long of Venus rotation truly
Right?
is.
Yeah.
I didn't know that one.
Yeah,
That's
she just
fascinating.
slowly moves in the opposite direction and just does her own thing.
Wow, powerful. So I'll hide those results, and then we can, I suppose we can close the call if, Kim, you
Well,
want to ask some questions?
let's check in. Adam has made it through his materials. Is there anybody who would like to ask him any questions or have Adam explore another subject in relationship to Venus and her retrograde cycle? You can just take your mouse and you can click under on the list of the attendees. You see that little hand?
Therese,
Therese,
go ahead, Therese.
go ahead, Therese. Ask your
Question.
That was a mistake. That was a mistake. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Well then, hello. That's okay. We'll take that back off. And does anybody else have questions or want to ask a comment or have Adam give us an opinion on anything in relationship to Venus and its cycle? I'm just checking the board here. And I'm not, no, that was a very good, it was very succinct, Adam. You're very, you've got some speaking experience, so you're very good.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so I'm just checking to see one more time. If not, we're doing pretty good, and we might be done just a little bit ahead of time. All right, last call for anybody who wants to ask a question, make a comment, hear from Adam on anything. You hit the little, you take your mouse and you hit the box right next to your name and right in front of your name, and then that raises your hand and we unmute you.
Adam, I have a curious question that somebody wrote in to ask, is if you had maybe one other chart example of an anonymous client or something that you'd want to share with Venus retrograde story, just as we're closing.
Yeah, definitely. I don't have the chart. I would have to sift through my computer to find it, but I can give you the example. It's a fascinating one.
Please.
Yeah, so it relates to a natal chart of a man, and he was born with Venus retrograde. And that's a pretty rare thing. I'd say 1 in 30 people have Venus retrograde in the natal chart, thus creating I don't know, it's a natural rebel. They think differently, they feel differently, and they're really picky in love. Is my experience of it. And I was in preparation for this talk, I was just briefing over some of Jeff's stuff in Pluto 2, and what I found interesting was him talking about looking for if a person has that in their natal chart, when did it go direct via progression? And so secondary progressions are a technique where 1 day equals a year, and so it will happen if if they were born the day Venus went retrograde, it would happen when they were 40 years old, and so most likely it'll happen somewhere else in between. And so I found out when this guy's Venus went direct via progression, and it happened 24 years after he was born, or it was 24 days after he was born, and then 24 years via progression. And it was also exactly conjunct his progressed Mars in the 11th house. And during that, literally that month that it went, because I honed it in on the day, and that month is when he came out of the closet.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, he always knew that he was kind of interested in men, but like he was just like always awkward with love and with physicality with both men and women. And then the month that Venus went direct in Leo in his 11th house, he like completely opened up to his sexuality, and has basically been running these gay men's groups, and working with teenagers that are having trouble getting out of the closet and all that stuff. And it's just like, it's a really beautiful story and how that actually happened on that day. And so it's the idea of clarity coming around Venus. What is Venus? But like our values around sensuality, sexuality, etc. Yeah.
Adam, if I may, that's interesting because you're reminding me of a client that I've had for almost 20 years, a Vietnam vet. And when transiting Neptune went over his natal Venus, he came out of the closet. And this gentleman had to be like in his mid-50s when that happened. And so it's interesting hearing the gender issues with Venus. And I mean, I understand transiting Neptune, and this was Neptune in late Aquarius, over Venus. And of course, you can see Venus in Aquarius. They're going to go for all kinds of experiences.
Right.
But he finally came out of the closet in his middle 50s. And now this gentleman is now 70. And you would think he was 40.
Wow.
And I've been counseling him a long, long time. And I'm like, and I finally had to say, now listen, honey, you just don't want the sex. You want the whole enchilada. It's okay to explore a little bit, but if you're just putting it out there that you want to have a good time, guess what? Then you're going to run in that direction. And now he's finally and Neptune is probably, Neptune is now about maybe almost 10 degrees away from that natal Venus, and he's finally recognizing and discerning, that value Venus over. I do want the whole enchilada. But that's you just reminded me of that. I do have one other question for you from someone, Adam.
Yeah.
This attendee is wondering if you've looked at Venus going over the Sun-Moon midpoint, which can be relationship or wellness issues or any experiences. Have you looked at Venus over midpoints in general? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I don't use midpoints.
Okay, well, there we
go.
go.
It's not that I don't believe in them. It's just I don't use them. So.
Well, you know what? I guess I have to admit I'm the same way. It's not. I could probably tell you a few of my midpoints, but I just haven't. I just haven't practiced with them.
Yeah, it's just a whole other layer. There's so many techniques, and I just tend to stick to my guns and my intuition.
Sure. How about here again? How about Venus Chiron aspects or connections?
Yeah, that's good. Let me think about that one for a second. If I have any examples, I know that I do.
Well, I would say that. Okay,
I do. I got a couple. I was noticing a pattern. Actually, when I was in Boulder, I thought it was really amusing that over 60% of the women that I knew that went to Naropa had Venus in Pisces. And it's a really interesting thing because, like, what's like an essential need for these women is mysticism, poetry, to be free, all this stuff. And what I noticed in this tight period of time when Chiron had moved into Pisces, and it was before Neptune had moved into Pisces as well, there was lady issues coming up with a lot of them, like polycystic fibrosis and uterine issues, failed pregnancies, stuff like that. And a lot of them they all made it through the experience, but the response that at least 3 I can think of in my head had to it was go to India. Like they all went to the motherland. They went to India, which, Chiron, like this like healing journey in Pisces, to this like a spiritual origin point for them. And yeah, that's a fascinating thing I can think of, and I'm trying to.
Well, I would say Venus Chiron, valuing oneself enough to heal, to claim healing as your right. You know, so much of that Virgo Pisces energy is, you know, again, Jeffrey would always say, turning that pyramid upside down, we're on the bottom. And I think Chiron is slowly but surely, you know, pointing out to us, do you want to keep going that way? And, you know, Venus can be that opportunity to increase one's self-value.
Yeah, I really like that. I could comment in saying that the origin as well, which was discovered through the readings, and I mean, a few of them already had a pretty good idea of like the energetic starting point to developing, you know, precancerous cells on their cervix or whatever it was not really valuing themselves and their body to the extent that they should. And there was like points along their history where there was like sexual abuse or being in relationships where they know they shouldn't have been in them the whole time, but just kind of like old paradigm, like allowing themselves to be in an abusive dynamic and like still sleeping with that man or whatever it was. And it's just like really not valuing their whole beings, but their bodies specifically. Yeah.
All right, anybody else? Our last call here, if you'd like any questions or comments anything you'd like us to give our sweet opinions on. If not, we'll let ourselves close out for the day.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. And to all the attendees, we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Again, you can choose to attend these sessions. You can leave the session, come back into the session with your link. So there's a lot of freedom on these webinars, and we thank you so much for participating. On behalf of Adam and Kim Marie, we'll call it a day.
Well, hold on, just a couple more things.
Go ahead, Kim.
Adam, I don't know if this was ever made clear to you as one of our presenters, but you are welcome to show up on any of the lectures if any of them are interesting to you.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And
sure.
and I just want to remind our attendees about tomorrow's lectures. At 10 a.m. we have Scott Wolfram from over in Germany talking about the Grand Cross in 2014 and the evolution of structural reform. And then at 1 o'clock we have Lydia Tredis from Utah talking about our generations, the Pluto signs and their effect upon multiple generations, or how all the different Pluto generations interact with each other. And then tomorrow at 3:30 we have Ginny Rodrigo from Canada talking about differentiation of the self, the nodal axis transit in Libra Aries. So some fascinating topics tomorrow. We hope you can all join us. And again, I'm sure you can see the list of speakers on our screen that we have yet to work our way through the rest of the week. So I want to thank everybody for a successful first day of our webinar. Yahoo! Kimberly and Leroy, technical end, have to celebrate. All right, Leroy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Adam.
You're very welcome.
Yeah,
and just to say, if like you want to read my stuff or listen to me yap about on my podcast and interview other astrologers and whatnot, it's holstoheavens.com. And you can email me at cosmonosis@gmail.com. That's KOSMOGNOSIS@gmail.com.
Very good.
All right. Thank you very much, Adam, and thank you, everyone.